นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening on this full moon night that in the Buddhist calendar it's called Pavarana Day. It marks the end of the 3-month range retreat. It's quite a notable day. It's still a day of practice, one of the weekly holy days that we have. Full moon day, the monks come together, and lay people come into the monastery, hear the Dhamma, practice. But for the monks, we just did a ceremony. Instead of listening to the recitation of the monks' rules as we would usually on the full moon night, we had a ceremony called Pavarana ceremony. Pavarana means invitation. And it's a word that you can use in different situations. So like lay people use the word when they want to give an invitation to a monk or group of monks, and they say, oh, if you need anything, Venerable Sir, I invite you to tell me. They call that a Pavarana. But when the monks do this ceremony, it means you're inviting the other members of the community who you've spent the 3 months retreat with. You're inviting them to bring up anything lingering in their minds, maybe we say anything seen, heard, or suspected, or any wrongdoing or inappropriate behavior or something that wasn't quite right. One can bring it up, and one's inviting the community to do that. And it's a practice the Buddha established for bringing harmony to the Sangha. Because when you're just living together, a few monks or many monks, monks are like anyone else in the world. We come into the robes, we've still got our imperfections, we still have our mental defilements, conditioning the mind, greed, anger, delusion. And just because you put on the robes, shave your head, doesn't mean to say those defilements have just all vanished, much as that would be nice. It doesn't always work like that. You have to practice to remove mental defilements, and that is the essence of our practice. We say abandoning evil, cultivating good, purifying the mind in the heart of the Buddhist practice. And what does purification of the mind mean? It means purification from these mental defilements, the effects of them, and the way they trigger unwholesome mental states and suffering. So because we are still conditioned by mental defilements, the Buddha had this once a year at the end of the range retreat to ask or invite admonition from our fellow monks. And it's something even an arahant, an enlightened being, would sit down and do. It's not just for the poor unenlightened monks, it's for everyone. Even an enlightened monk could theoretically make a mistake, maybe unwittingly offend someone, like Venerable Sariputta with the old Brahmin. He just rubbed his robe gently on his shoulder, and because the Brahmin was very jealous and upset and not very peaceful, got all upset with Venerable Sariputta, who was an arahant, and raised it with the Buddha, criticizing Sariputta, who then had to explain how his mind was pure, free from greed, anger, and delusion, and it wasn't quite what the old Brahmin thought. And many other occasions, a senior monk, and a monk even considered to be an enlightened monk, will still join in and do this ceremony to set an example and for community harmony. Everyone joins in. And it's also pointing to an attitude. It's an attitude we develop, particularly in monastic training, is that we are willing to learn from mistakes. Defilements, greed, anger, delusion can come up and affect our behavior, our conduct sometimes in different ways, subtle or gross. And so we have to be ready to hear from another monk maybe where we made a mistake, or did something wrong, or were unmindful. Or from a teacher. Most likely it'll be from a teacher, but not always. And it means that you can live together with a sense of harmony, safety. You can trust your fellow monks, and you trust that if there's something not right, well, you can talk about it. So it's developing the skill of good communication, good listening, good communication. And really, this is part of our practice. It's not something you do just on this day, but it's more like a part of the practice is we're reviewing our own conduct of body, speech, and mind regularly to see whether we're still abandoning the unwholesome and cultivating the wholesome or not. When monks admonish each other, sometimes it's just a simple thing like, you remind somebody that they forgot to pick up their robe or something, maybe they forgot it somewhere, because people forget things, don't they? Monks forget. So that could be an example of admonishment. You say, oh, Venerable Sir, you left your robe there. Could be something very simple, or it could be something more serious. Maybe a monk has really broken a serious rule of training, or they picked up a wrong view and wrong understanding of the Dhamma. Maybe they say, oh, karma is out of date. Karma no longer applies to anyone. Since the Buddha passed away, karma is not really operating anymore, or something like that, whatever. Sometimes monks do fall into wrong views. But when we admonish, the Buddha said, well, there's guidelines for that. When you admonish someone, you have to practice right speech. You have to ground yourself in practice of loving kindness. Speak words that are true, honest. Pick a good time, the right place to admonish the other monk. Say words that are gentle on the ear and beneficial for the listener and will be useful for them. So this word we use, Pavarana, inviting admonition, is a whole skill in itself. You're learning how to receive and give admonition. It's not always easy, but we also do it for the lay community, because if monks can learn to live in harmony, then that's something that lay people can observe and benefit from as well. And at least, in the Buddhist community, most people have heard the word Mahapavarana Day, but although they might not know exactly what that means, but they know the word. So it may lead on to people asking, well, what does it mean, and how do you practice, and what happens in the monastery? And in Buddhist communities, the wider Buddhist community, monasteries are one place that helps to preserve the teachings and the practice. And part of that comes through preserving the monks' discipline, the Vinaya. So it is an important part of our practice as monks, but also for the lay people. And as we all know, the world at this time, more wars, more conflicts, or whether it's just, in your own individual life, maybe you still have some unfinished conflicts. We have conflicts with people at work. Sometimes they're very minor differences of opinion or disagreements over who does what, the division of labor and work, tasks, sometimes petty jealousies and rivalries. People dislike each other at work. Sometimes in the family, we have sibling rivalries, siblings not talking to each other. neighbors not talking to each other, and so on. It happens anywhere on any scale, whether it's between countries or individuals. So it is a part of our life, and the Buddha gave many teachings and explanations how to deal with that. And in meditation, you're learning how to deal with that. Sometimes the conflict is just within yourself, two parts of your own mind arguing. And you'll see that when desire comes up strongly, and another part of the mind, you might call that the wisdom part, says, don't do that. This is following defilement. This is indulging your greed or your selfishness. Don't do that. Don't say that. But then if the desire is strong, it's a strong passion, it's a strong impulse, maybe it wins and you do it anyway, and you ignore the wise reflection of the mind. That, these two parts of the mind battle, and the part of desire wins. So you do it anyway. You say it, you eat it, you do it. So sometimes the conflict is internal. Sometimes it's with others externally. But it's part of life. And it definitely, if you're practicing the Buddhist teachings, you'll see it come up all the time. When I first became a monastic, went to live in the monastery, I was a white-robed Anagarika, and I was just beginning to learn Buddhist terminology and words, both in Pali and Thai, because I was living in Thailand. I was at Wat Bapong Ajahn Chah's monastery, and there was a bell, and it was at a time that there wasn't usually a bell. Most group meetings were called by a bell. If there was a bell, it meant you had to go somewhere. There's one central bell tower, and a loud bell would be rung, say at 3 a.m. to get up in the morning, go to the meditation. So that was a bell sound that everyone hated. Bell for the meal, a bell for chores, bell for chanting. And sometimes there'd be a bell at an unexpected time, and I asked somebody, well, what's that bell for? And they said, oh, it's a special work period. There's some job that we all need to go, move something or do some job that requires a lot of people. So it's a bell to call us to help do that work. And I said, is that compulsory? Because I was new, I wasn't quite sure. And the monk said, yes, that means everyone has to go. It's compulsory. If you don't go, it's a sign that you haven't learned to give up your ditthi mana. And so it was a new couple of words I learned when I was very brand new in the monastery, ditthi and mana. So if you've been practicing a while, you probably know these words. Ditthi means views, meaning attachment to your own personal views and opinions, self-view. Mana means self, the conceit of self, the idea and the attachment to the idea of self. And it was sort of a catchphrase that Ajahn Chah used a lot, and the monks under Ajahn Chah used a lot. And you're working with your ditthi and your mana, because they're both considered to be defilements, mental defilements, fueled by attachment to sense of self, so your own body, your own mind, and of course your own thoughts, views, opinions, beliefs, what you think is right, what you think is wrong, what you think is good, what you think is bad, built up over a lifetime. And when you come into a monastery, Ajahn Chah used to say, you have to set your ditthi and your mana, your views and your conceit, set them down at the gate. And that symbolized, say, the Buddha, for lay people who are entering the monastery in the time of the Buddha, he said, well, you should set down your umbrella, because people sometimes would be wearing an umbrella, not just for the rain, but they'll be holding an umbrella, not just for the rain, but for the sun as well. And it's often a sign of status, who you are. You're somebody if you've got an umbrella. Nowadays, status is maybe the brand of phone you've got, the kind of car you drive, your neighborhood where you live, all these kind of superficial expressions of self. In the time of the Buddha, it's your umbrella. So there's a rule, you have to take it down when you enter the monastery. Even the king is supposed to take down his umbrella when he comes into the monastery. And it symbolizes leaving your ditthi and your mana, your sense of pride, conceit, self-view at the gate of the monastery. And you come in and you let go and give up to the Dhamma and the Vinaya, something higher, better. And also, similarly, you take off your shoes. And people would do that in the days when I first started. They would come to the gate and they'd take their shoes off and carry them in to the monastery. They wouldn't wear them out of respect, because they said, well, every square inch of the monastery land is monastery land. It was offered to the Sangha, belongs to the Sangha, belongs to the Buddha. And this taking off of shoes is a sign of respect. Nowadays, we know that's a good thing when you walk barefoot on the ground. They say it can help remove static electricity from your body. It's quite a healthy thing. Gives your feet a massage as you walk on the ground. That's quite healthy, and massages, the energy lines and the blood vessels which go up through the body. It's humbling. And it makes you mindful, because if you're walking barefoot, especially in Ajahn Chah's monastery, you have to keep very mindful of where you're placing your feet, because you might tread on a sharp pebble or a tree root, or even a snake, or a trail of biting soldier ants, all of which I've done, I think. Ajahn Chah started his monastery in the 1950s, the early 50s, and there was very little support for the monks, and they didn't have torches, but they occasionally had a candle which they could carry in a little cloth lantern to light their way when they walked barefoot around the monastery. And often they didn't have shoes at all. And he said, very rarely did you have many candles in the monastery, so monks didn't like to use them. They'd just walk in the dark, using their mindfulness, their sharpened awareness, using whatever light was available. On a full moonlight night like tonight, it was okay, maybe you can see your way a bit in the moonlight, but it was a dark night, you couldn't see much at all. If you trod on ants, you'd quickly know, because they'd bite, and you'd hear monks running for it and then stamping their feet, not to kill the ants, but just to shake them off. And you'd hear a monk going, ow, 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 stamping the foot. Or lay people as well. And sometimes you even trod on a snake, the back of a snake. So you learn to be very light-footed. And as your foot comes down, if you feel that kind of soft but leathery feel of the skin of the snake, and almost every snake was poisonous, only a few of them were not. And those ones that weren't were usually constricted, like pythons or something. When you put your foot down on the back of a poisonous snake, the barefoot helps because you feel it. It's also not going to hurt the snake yet. And you just trust in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and your good karma. You practice metta and you quickly move on. So you don't squash the snake, and you hope for the best. And Ajahn Chah said, well, you just stride out Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, Buddha, Buddha, and you hope for the best. And surprisingly, nobody really got bitten, even though they trod on snakes. In Australia, I've trodden on a tiger snake, and luckily it didn't bite me. But I wouldn't recommend to do it, but it does happen. But the idea is, it's a monastery, so you take off your shoes, you put your umbrella down, and you walk respectfully to the main hall, or to visit the senior teacher maybe, leaving your ditthi and your mana behind, your attachment to conceit, self-view, so that you can receive the Dhamma, and that you're ready, you have the right frame of mind. And when people don't do that, because obviously we're not always mindful, we're often deluded. And what does ditthi and mana, conceit and attachment to views do to you? It deludes you. And it feeds, all the sort of things we know in life. I'm right, you're wrong. It should be like this. It shouldn't be like that. This is better. That's worse. Argument stuff. Yeah. Why don't arahants argue? Is because they no longer attach to self-view. They're empty of self-view and conceit. Why do ordinary unenlightened people argue? Is because they're full of attachment to views and conceit. So at least temporarily you leave them at the door and you get a good rest from your own conceit and views, which are kind of like oppressors. They oppress your mind, always feeding what we call papancha, the proliferation of the mind, which we see when we meditate, don't we? When you meditate, you have this endless trains of thought, opinions, views. Well, this is right, this is wrong, I like this, don't like that, I want this, don't want that. Me. That's papancha, fed by craving, conceit, and views. It's the bit of the mind that is not peaceful when you meditate. And you become peaceful when you meditate because you at least temporarily had enough mindfulness to see it and know it and let it go, put it down. So the putting down of the shoes and the parasol or the umbrella is symbolic, but what it means is you're entering the holy space of the monastery to let go. Just as when you meditate, you're entering the holy space of the meditation, which you've received from the Buddha and your teacher, the meditation objects such as Buddho or the breath in Anapanasati. You receive it, you receive the instruction, and then you're entering that holy space of your mind. And you need to set aside some of all this conceit and views, otherwise you'll never be peaceful and your meditation will be very hard work, slow going. And part of meditation is observing how conceit and views cause rivalries, division, conflict between people, because it will come up, won't it? You remember people who you see as competitors or people who have hurt your feelings or disagreed with you, and it will come up and it will feed strong emotions, emotions that often are so powerful you just have to sit with them. Anger, worry, fear, and greed, selfishness, greed, all of them, you'll see them come up fed by self-view and the proliferation of the mind, which feeds back into the emotions, and the emotions feed back into the proliferation. What cuts through it is mindfulness. Mindfulness is that turning to the Dhamma again, to that which is higher, better. It's the path, the path of practice. And as you bring mindfulness into your consciousness, maybe using the breath or any other meditation technique, ditthi and mana, conceit, attachment to views and opinions starts to fade. And when you're peaceful, it's temporarily faded out. The self-view is gone, isn't it? When you're peaceful in meditation, mindfulness is there, strong. You're just with the breath, perhaps, or any other meditation you're doing. Then the sense of self disappears. Some of that mental chatter disappears. There's a spaciousness of mind, or even an emptiness of mind that comes up. It gives you this new view of yourself and even your own views. You realize, well, maybe I don't need to cling so tightly to my views and opinions, because when you cling tightly, then it leads you to clash with others, or even just clash within your own mind. And when mindfulness is strong, conceit and attachment to view starts to weaken, maybe disappears, if only temporarily. You get a good rest and your mind is in a much better place to reflect on these things, to see what are views. How do we form beliefs and views? Well, based on past experience and what we've heard and read and thoughts that come up, we attach with a sense of self. You attach based on usually what you like, what makes you feel good in your body becomes what is right for you, good for you. And what makes you feel pain and uncomfortable is wrong. And so right and wrong form largely through feeling. You see things, hear things, taste things, and then you are reacting to the feelings that they stimulate. But it's a sort of self-reinforcing process. So you feel good, so you say, well, that's good for me. So, for example, you eat the food that makes you feel good, and then you say, well, that good food is good for me, right for me. And that will feed the opinion, the belief that food is good for me, right for me, I like that food. And then you'll seek it out and you'll eat more of it and you'll get more pleasant feeling. And you go round in circles so the view becomes stronger. Trouble is in life, we often miss all of this because things happen fast. And our mindfulness is scattered around all kinds of things. So, if we're honest, I think in life we're very rarely sitting down observing how we form opinions and views, strong opinions and views around food. Maybe occasionally you have one when you eat something you really don't like, or you probably remember that. You say, oh, I don't like that. I don't want that anymore. Okay, it does happen sometimes. You'll notice and remember it, but you're probably not aware of the chain of events and the causal process that led up to that. But as we start practicing mindfulness, meditation, vipassana, investigating, maybe you do notice. And you can, especially if you're on retreat or you're looking at your experience, or you notice how views and opinions form, how they affect you, how they're reinforced sometimes. So you gravitate towards people with similar views. Maybe people who like the same food as you, people who like the same religion as you, same teaching, same places, same things, same activities. Even culture and society is, to a certain extent, we identify with our culture, our society, our likes and dislikes. But this is all something you can investigate, and meditation gives you the tools to do that, rather than just being a habit of your own attachments and sense of self always reacting in the same old way. And maybe it can get stronger, and that will prompt more things as well. Because, say you attach to a certain view, and this is right, this is good for me. Say you attach to the view that you like a certain food, whatever it may be. Pick a food, noodles, okay. So you like noodles, I am a noodle liker. So you identify with that. So someone else comes along and says, oh, I hate noodles, noodles are really bad. Maybe already you start feeling irritated with that person, even though they're just expressing their opinion, which is equal to you. It's just the opposite. And it becomes a problem then. Maybe you see them come into the room, here comes the noodle eater. Is your opinion maybe formed over many years of identifying with noodles as your preferred food, and knowing the brand of noodles you like and where you can buy, or the restaurant you can buy them, and how they should be cooked. Even two noodle lovers come together and they can argue about the best way to cook them, what spices and ingredients to add. Even something as simple as noodles can become a problem in life, in the world. Then you multiply that by all the other things we attach to with self-view and the self-belief and views and opinions. So number one may be politics, religion, all these things. Well, of course, that can lead on to real conflict, violent conflict, wars, animosity, grudges, karma. But in terms of meditation, we're observing it in the mind, and we're observing how attachment to views and sense of self comes up, and it causes us endless suffering internally, let alone with other people. So when the monk said, yes, it's compulsory, the bell goes, you have to go, if you don't go, it's because you're attached to your views and opinions and your sense of self. I started to get it. That was my introduction to Ajahn Chah's way of practice. You might call it the practice of establishing mindfulness and understanding in daily life. And of course, you can react to a bell. We all know the story of Pavlov's dog. Ring the bell and he starts salivating because he knows there's going to be food coming. So it is a bit like that. Sometimes you hear the bell and you sort of panic. You hear the bell first and you start moving, and then you think, what's the bell for? And it can be like that. Again, delusion, lack of mindfulness comes into any part of life, doesn't it? So even a bell in a monastery can be misunderstood or just reacted to without mindfulness. But it's more getting the idea that the monastic life, for me and for many others, it starts to expose all kinds of attachment to preferences, self-view, conceit, views. Sometimes we summarize it as Sakkaya Ditthi, personality view, or literally taking this body as me, mine, myself, self-view based around the body. And of course, even though the mind is a more subtle, invisible thing, it uses the body as the vehicle. So it comes together with the body. When we say Sakkaya Ditthi, it isn't just the body, it's also the mind, feelings, thoughts, the whole package. So when the bell is rung, and you might have a thought, oh, I don't want to go, having maybe encountered such thoughts before, you can establish mindfulness and say, this is a view I may need to set down, set aside. Perhaps because there is a requirement, you need to attend a meeting or a workplace or something. And this is how we practiced. They say, what did you do with Luang Por Chah or in his monastery? Well, you learned to set aside your ditthimana. And when you didn't, you saw the suffering, because you'd have views and opinions come up all the time. We shouldn't do this, we should do that. So maybe you're doing a job like sweeping leaves on a windy day and you sweep, and then all the leaves come down again half an hour later after you've been sweeping. The ditthimana, the attachment to views and opinions, comes up, and you turn to another monk, you say, why are we sweeping in the wind? As soon as you sweep, the wind blows everything all over the place. Isn't this a waste of time? And the other monk might say, well, it's the chores time. We still need to sweep. Just sweep anyway. We can always sweep again tomorrow. Or one of the best answers I heard is two monks were arguing. One was saying, oh, we got such a big area we have to sweep. The whole grounds of the monastery and around the main meditation hall at Ajahn Chah's monastery. It was a big area. It's so big, and then you sweep a load, it takes ages, takes an hour, we've swept it, and then the wind blows and it's all back again, and you've got to sweep again. It's endless. Why are we doing this? So he's starting to complain. And you say, the more I look out, the more work I see. It's like it becomes so disappointing, so depressing. And the other monk said, oh, I only look at the end of my broom. More practical, down-to-earth approach. I look at the end of my broom and I just sweep there, which is a bit like bringing up mindfulness, isn't it? The view, the opinion arises, but you establish mindfulness and, okay, well, you can see that's the view, that's an opinion. I like it, I don't like it. But that's all it is in that moment. It's just one view, one opinion, one bit of self arising. Once you establish mindfulness, you have a choice, don't you? You can follow it or you can let it go. When there's no mindfulness, of course, you'll identify with your view, your belief, your opinion, and it leads on to suffering of one kind or other, either your own complaining mind or an argument with another person or grumbling, sets of mind states perhaps. And young monks all know this because they're full of it. Probably if you're not in a monastery, if you're not experiencing a bit of conceit and views, it probably means you're not practicing correctly. Because if you are practicing correctly, it will come up for sure. But the good news is there's a cure. You establish mindfulness over and over again, and you gradually recognize how your pulled around by your attachment to opinions, views, beliefs. Luang Por Chah, he didn't say don't have any views and beliefs and opinions on things. He just said no when they are arising so that they don't cause you suffering. So his way was saying, well, don't grasp too tightly to the opinion. If you grasp tightly, then that's delusion and it will cause you suffering. If someone agrees with you, you're happy. If someone disagrees with you, you're angry. If something happens that agrees with your view of the world, you're satisfied. If something happens that goes against your view of the world, you say, this shouldn't happen, I don't want this, and you're unhappy. But that's been conditioned by the world, isn't it? Because you're grasping too tightly to the view with a sense of self. But when you establish mindfulness, you can investigate that, see that at work, and let go, or at least loosen the grip. So Ajahn Chah said, loosen the grip, know the view, the opinion. It can come up in your mind, fair enough. You may have held that opinion for a long time, or it may be something you just newly acquired, what is right and wrong. But don't attach so tightly that it causes you suffering. That's a skill that comes through meditation. So if you notice when you're more mindful as you meditate, you may have different views, opinions, thoughts coming up. You see them, you know them, but you can also put them down. If you're not attaching so tightly, then you can put something down, just like your shoes or your umbrella. If you grip your umbrella so tightly, you can't put it down at the gate of the monastery, or you can't put your shoes down because you're gripping too tightly. It's like that, knowing how to pick things up, use them, look at them, be with them, but then also knowing how to put them down. It brings a lightness to the mind. And part of our practice is developing mindfulness and a continuity of awareness so that you get this lightness of mind. You can pick things up, look at them, put them down. You partly, it comes with the qualities of samadhi. As your mindfulness improves, you have states of calm, states of samadhi, then gives you this quality where you can, look at things from different angles. Your mind becomes, we say, pliant or workable. And if you're going to see a view as a view, see your attachment to the view, you've got to be able to look at it and recognize what's going on. So you need that lightness or gentleness of mind. And sometimes you have to be willing to say, oh, maybe I got a wrong view here, or I'm attaching, even if it seems like a right view, some aspect of Dhamma that you've learned, you think this is really good, and then someone else disagrees. But you have a way of looking at it and with a lightness of mind rather than attaching so tightly that it can still lead you into a disagreement or an argument. And you probably know once in the life of the Buddha, there was the group of monks, they split. The monastery, Kosambi, in the one group of monks, they followed the monk who was in charge of teaching the Vinaya, the discipline, and the other group, they followed the monk who taught the Dhamma, it's more the suttas and that aspect of the Dhamma practice. They had a disagreement over something as simple as how you put down your water dipper in the toilet. In those days, no taps, no flush toilets. You cleaned the toilet by washing it down with water, and you need a dipper to spray the water around. Ajahn Chah's monastery used to be the same. And they're always, you put the dipper upside down so the water drains away so it's dry for the next guy. But this monk left it up, so there's a little bit of water left, and that's considered bad form, breaking a small minor rule. So that an argument arose between the Vinaya master and the Dhamma master, and then each had their own group of supporters and students. So the whole monastery split. He's right, he's wrong, because they weren't able to see their own attachment to their self-view and their opinion in that situation. One monk told me they probably weren't meditating very much. When you don't meditate very much, you don't see your attachments, do you? You don't see how you attach to your view of what is right and wrong, and that's where the suffering comes from, which is another reason why we should meditate more. Anyway, they all split, and the result was, well, the Buddha got so fed up and kept sending other senior monks in to teach the monks to be more harmonious and more careful. It didn't work. So in the end, the Buddha said, well, that's it. I'm off on retreat. So one year, the Buddha went off on retreat. You probably know the story. The Buddha's in the Palelai, the Lilaya forest, and he had fed up with monks, people, and all their arguments and fights and disagreements. So he just had one elephant and one monkey bringing him a little bit of food, just enough to get by for the 3 months retreat. Nice and peaceful. And all the lay people were so upset that the Buddha had left town because of these monks who were arguing too much, attaching too much to their views and opinions. They all lost interest in putting food in the monks' bowls, so the monks got very skinny, started to get bug-eyed and yellow skin, and walking around very unhappy. So that finally the monks came to their senses that, oh, if we could just mend our ways and negotiate and agree a bit more, listen to each other, be a bit more kind and helpful to each other, then maybe the Buddha will come back and the lay people will be happier and they'll give us some proper food. So, of course, that's what happened. So attaching to too many views and opinions too tightly leads to disharmony in your own mind, disharmony between people. And, take the Buddha, or you might say the symbolic Buddha of mindfulness and wisdom, leaves your mind, leaves the place, and everything gets darker and worse, doesn't it? Whereas when you introduce the Dhamma of mindfulness, wisdom, reflection, then that's like the light coming in, and then you can see the harm of attachment. Whether it's, husband and wife, work colleagues, groups of people, countries, we all need to do this more. Basically, we all need to meditate, develop more mindfulness, and reflect on things a bit more, and some of these conflicts will reduce. If other people are not doing, at least we can. Each individual has that opportunity to look and learn from their own experience. And as Ajahn Chah would say, become their own teacher. In this phrase, atano jote atanang. Teach yourself, remind yourself. Don't cling too tightly to your views and opinions. Establish mindfulness and look and learn from that. You may notice where something is a bit off. You're attaching so tightly that you're getting angry or upset or afraid. This is what we have to look at and investigate as we meditate. Greed and anger are probably more easy to see, aren't they? They have their ways of displaying themselves. Delusion is the hard one. The most subtle sense of self. It's just sort of way down there that you don't always notice it. But as you become more mindful, you have to investigate even delusion and how it forms around views. Even, as Ajahn Chah would say, what is right may not be correct, or what is correct may not be right. If you attach too tightly and too blindly, you attach to the right thing, but it can still lead to an argument or dissatisfaction, suffering in one way or another. Ajahn Chah himself, he didn't talk so much about, the higher dhammas of enlightenment or nibbana. Again, he was setting an example. He didn't walk around saying, I'm enlightened or I've reached nibbana, because that's not a very good example. People then start to just say that when they maybe haven't reached it. He didn't want people to attach to the idea of nibbana too much, because people tend to overestimate or misunderstand their experience sometimes. But he would say things like, I have nothing. And people would say, what have you attained, Lumpur? Are you an arahant? He said, I'm nothing, or I have nothing. Another one he would say is, I don't argue. I listen, I express myself, but I don't argue. I have no more arguments and no more wish to argue. It's because there's no more blind or strong attachment to views and opinions with a sense of self. You know, he would teach, and obviously he's teaching what we call right view, but there's no blind attachment to that. So what does the enlightened monk have? They don't have anything. What are they? They're nothing. So if you're getting close to nothingness, emptiness, then you're probably going a bit closer to Nibbana. You know, the technical word sunyata, emptiness. Anyway, for tonight, maybe I'll leave you with these reflections, and afterwards, if there's any questions, can answer. Try our best to answer them.
Handamayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karang Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodami